But this is such a fun way for learners to orally be able to explain something that might be pretty complex, but when they're doing it in this really engaging way, I like referring it to like low floor, high ceiling, right? Exactly. Our kids can just jump right in and the possibilities are endless.
Hello there, and welcome to today's episode of the Easy EdTech Podcast. My name is Monica Burns, and I am so glad that you're here to join me today. If you want to make the most of education technology, aka EdTech, well, you are in the right place. My goal has always been to help make EdTech easier and give you ideas you can try yourself, share with a colleague, or bookmark for later in the school year. Every Tuesday here on the Easy EdTech Podcast, you'll hear stories from my time in the classroom, the work I do now with schools and districts, and my travels to different EdTech events. Get ready for solo episodes where I share some quick tips and stories, and interviews full of practical ideas and stories from new guests each month. If we mention something you'd like to check out, make sure to click the link. You'll find it in the episode description or the summary area where you're listening to this podcast, or you can find every episode and all of the resources we mention by going to classtechtips.com/podcast or by going to classtechtips.com and just clicking on the Easy EdTech Podcast button at the top of the page. This episode is sponsored by my free weekly planner pages. I've created a downloadable set of planner pages for you that you can start using today. It's a great way to stay organized in the new year or anytime you like. Print them out to write in your daily schedule and tasks, or use the file on your tablet or computer to keep track of your to-do list and set your priorities each day. These planner pages are totally free, and you can find them at classtechtips.com/planner. This week's episode is titled An AI Connection to Using Animation in the Classroom with Nikki Jones. We talk about how to get started with animation, some free tools to consider, and plenty of project ideas to try out. Nikki shares how her students are responding to using AI tools, and she gives lots of ideas you can customize this school year. Let's dive into the conversation. Welcome to the podcast, Nikki. I am so excited to chat about animation in the classroom and an AI connection. But before we get into all of that, can you share a bit about your role in education? What does your day-to-day look like?
Hey, Monica, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. So I am actually an instructional technology coach, and I work in an elementary pre-K to 5 building. So every day looks a little bit different. I am doing collaboration meetings, planning, co-teaching. I'm in modeling lessons. I am having small groups. So really everything is happening, and I can bounce from a kindergarten classroom to a 5th grade classroom back to 1st grade, and my head is whirling.
I bet. I mean, so many different groups, right? And needs and proficiency, and I'm sure comfort level with different types of technology, particularly animation, which can feel intimidating for someone who's like, I don't draw, or I don't want to use clay for stop motion, right? Or I think people have like big feelings around that term. And so, I wanted to unpack it with you and hear a little bit about how you started. How did you start incorporating animation into your lessons?
So this honest answer goes way back to when I was a 1st grade teacher, and I definitely took on stop motion with little figures in that stop motion app. And I don't know, do you remember Toontastic?
Yeah, I use that with my students. Like, we're talking 12 years ago, 10 years ago.
Okay, yeah. You're making us sound really old, but it was a long time ago. And that's where it really started. And I noticed that my students, as 1st graders, right, 6 and 7-year-olds, were super engaged when I was able to get them creating in these like hands-on project-based learning. And these are things that kids are naturally drawn to. So I started doing that with my littles. And then when I became a coach, it was something that I wanted to empower other educators to do. So fast forward to more recently, some of the animation I have been using is Adobe's Animate from Audio. And hear me out, even if you are not a big like animation person or pressing all the buttons, the amazing thing about Animate from Audio is it is simply from your voice. And all of the animation will be done behind the scenes with AI. The character, you select the character, you don't need to draw the character. It can be related to your topic. One thing just to note on that, Monica, I've noticed so many amazing characters coming out
Yeah,
in
there's a lot of new
Adobe,
stuff.
a
Mhm.
lot of new stuff and a lot of things that students can identify with. So we have just, I'm going off a little bit here,
Yeah.
but I have a student that wears a hijab, and she
Mhm.
was so excited when she did one of her big math projects that she was able to use an animation character that looked just like her. So I think that's really cool that kids can, not everybody wants to be recorded and make a video of themselves, but this
Mhm.
is such a fun way for learners to orally be able to explain something that might be pretty complex, but when they're doing it in this really engaging way, it becomes, I like referring it to like low floor, high ceiling, right? Our
Exactly.
kids can just jump right in and the possibilities are endless.
I love that framing because I do think it's something where you can get a quick win, right? You could use, right, that type of technology, the Adobe Animate from Audio specifically, like for these little bursts. And I love that you mentioned Toontastic because that was one of those early iPad apps in my classroom, right, as a teacher, right, where we did something really similar, which was bring these characters to life with our voice. And it could be, right, talking about anything, right? Any content area, any subject area. So, why do you believe animation is such a powerful tool for a K-12 classroom? You mentioned the student engagement piece, but are there other factors for an educator to consider as they're kind of sorting through all the options and deciding what to bring to their students?
I think engagement, obviously, that's like a no brainer, but this is really what's relevant. This is what they are seeing in the world around them. We have kids that could grow up and be graphic designers, could be in an animation process. So I feel like it's something that they're naturally drawn to and excited to do. Beyond that, I think that it just builds in some of these soft skills that are so important for our
Mhm.
learners to get. And it's such an easy, that quick win term that you use, it is such a great way to get quick wins.
That's a great point about just the soft skills piece because sometimes when we talk about right different types of creations, like I don't think I'm going to make a podcast one day, or I don't think I'm going to be a movie maker, I don't think I'm going to be an animator, right? But that product that kids are creating is helping them build so many more muscles, right? That they can apply to lots of different right contexts, right? Both inside and outside of the classroom. So what are some of your favorite ways to use animation for instruction? I'm thinking here both like teacher created materials, maybe introducing a concept, and those student made animations we might use to check for understanding.
So for teacher created, I love using that Adobe Animate from Audio if I'm introducing a new concept or I just want to grab their attention with something. That's a great way to do it. I love inside of Animate from Audio, you can also change the background. So there's lots of beautiful backgrounds already in there, but you can customize that background. So if I'm explaining something new, I will make a quick graphic and it can be as simple as life cycles, right? If we're talking about our little learners, and it can be as complex as the process of pollination for some of I'm thinking science is on my
Yeah.
brain right now, some of those things, and have the visual behind you. And it's so much more powerful to get that little 3-minute video of an animation. Our kids are going to watch it and just be more intrigued by it. And then I think it's also a really powerful way to kind of ask those curious questions, ask those probing questions, and prompt a lesson before you get started. And there are so many student generated projects that I have done with Adobe Animate from Audio from a math concept. So having students, fifth graders, particularly this year, they were struggling with explaining order of operations. So we had them create their own order of operations problems right inside of Adobe. They made that their background. They created a script. So we incorporated the language arts in there. And then they went through and explained the process. As soon as they heard their friend's explanation, they're like, oh, you have to do this first. And I was like, your teacher has been saying that to you all the last 2 weeks, but they heard that Monica told them that you had to do it this way, left to right, multiplication, division. They were, whatever the tip was, they were like, oh, we didn't know. So that's just really one of the powerful things. And then really using it for those project-based learning pieces. And one of the projects that really came together this year was for fourth graders. At the end of their living system, they really had to understand ecosystems beyond it just being aquatic or terrestrial and the animals that were in it. They had to understand the living, the non-living, how those things all interacted in a food web or a food chain. They had to understand the niche, the population, the community. There was so much science vocabulary that we really wanted to break it down into these bite-sized pieces that we felt like with something like Animate from Audio, this very complex thing that we were asking students to explain became manageable because they took so much ownership in creating their ecosystems. So some of them actually started from scratch and some of them used Gen AI in Adobe. So they put a description of what they wanted their ecosystem to look like or their background for their ecosystem to look like. And it was the learning that happened with this was blowing our minds. And I mean, one day it was so funny. The kids were getting ready to go to another class. And this teacher, particularly, her class is usually very quiet in the hallway and she has great management. And they walked into the hallway and they just wouldn't stop talking. And they were talking about their projects and what they had created with Gen AI and what they were adding to it. And then another teacher was like, what are you guys talking about? And that spread. So then she took that idea and ran with it. And we had like a whole nother coaching cycle happening because she was so excited and her kids got so interested in what they were doing. But if we go back to that traditional, give them a multiple choice test at the end of the unit or make a poster, these things are just not relevant right now any longer.
Yeah. And just that organic buzz right around an activity is so interesting. And, you shared, Nikki, both, right, some of the student creating pieces, which I want to get back to in a second, but then also the teacher videos, right? And, I was just with a group of New York City educators a couple weeks ago. This is pre the flip grid of it all shift, right? So flip was one of the tools we were looking at actually, and they were playing with that one. We looked at animate with audio, right? Animate with audio from audio with Adobe Express. We looked at a couple others, seesaws, right? Camera tool, just for this idea that you might want to try this out for a morning message or to introduce a vocabulary word, so that you can press all the buttons, get a feel for what's possible. And then, right, maybe that's when you hand it over to students for a project like that ecosystem one you're talking about. And, I'd love to hear a little bit more about this generative AI connection to student projects. You mentioned them using the text to image tool to describe their own ecosystem or describe their own animal. Can you unpack a little bit of that for us, or maybe any tips that you have, right, as you're introducing something like that to a group of kiddos?
So what we talked a lot about is when we were introducing this is about using precise language. And we did a lot on paper before we went to the computer. And I think just in general, one thing that I've learned, especially the last couple of years, is working with young children, it serves them well to make a plan. So I've done a lot of coming up with these plans with teachers, the collaboration and co-planning it, so they have something written down on paper before they go to their computer. So that might look like a prompt that's all ready to go with some villains, or it might look like brainstorming a bunch of different words. And I think my big thing or my tip for that is to just start small. You don't have to start with an ecosystem project. You can start with something as simple at the beginning of the year as students like telling you how to pronounce their name.
Yeah.
That would be a beautiful thing right inside Animate from Audio, or giving that you two truths and a lie. So there are really some easy ways to get kids in. And I love that you said, push all of the buttons. But I think as educators, we have to sometimes let go of that control of knowing all of the things, because it's okay. Your kids they will know what to do. And if they don't, they're not going to look at you for the answer. They're going to try to figure it out. Or you can tell them like, hey, I noticed that Monica already did it. Can you ask her? And I've seen that really build a lot of leadership capacity inside of the classroom, which I think is really powerful too.
Yeah, just, building that independence for students to say, like, I can figure out what to do, or this button looks kind of like another tool that we've used before. It's probably the button for sharing, right? Or whatever it might be. So, how do kids react to AI, right, in the classroom? Have they typically tried it before they've come to work with you? Is this new to them? Like, what are they thinking when they see this text to image or an animation come to life with their voice?
Most of our learners, especially this year, have been brand new to AI or the animation. So it's kind of magical to see their reactions. Most kids are just blown away at what they can do. And then the possibilities can be endless for them. The things that we had students creating that were just outside of things, we had one girl immediately, she plays the piano. So she went home and she used Animate from Audio, and she introduced herself and she introduced a song that she had learned, and she had played the piano and shared. So it kind of became this like talent show thing. Somebody made a comedy, like they got up and they did stand-up jokes. So it was cool to see them be so engaged in the classroom with this that they took it and wanted to really apply it in the real world and see what they could create outside of school. There are only a few kids that get frustrated, and some of it is the kids that typically don't like to write or want to just have something done quick, because it does take some tweaking to get your prompting correct. So I think there was a challenge. One of the first Adobe creativity challenges this year was making do you remember alter ego? That's what it was. And having that prompt already generated from Adobe with these are just the fill-ins, I found that that was really helpful for my learners to get started and kind of get the hang of what words you needed to use or how you needed to word things to make things look the way you wanted to. I think that was the biggest thing at first for them, is to realize that what they're giving the computer is directly affecting the output, but it wasn't always matching what their brain was expecting or thinking. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And, we are so conditioned, and kids too, right, to a Google search, right? You put in the keyword and you kind of get what you get. It almost feels impersonal in different ways. But when you are typing this prompt out, if you don't get what you're hoping for, it feels a little bit more like a personal feedback, like, oh, my prompt needs to be tweaked. I need to refine this. So it's really interesting that you've seen that dynamic with students, right, who might use Gen AI, right, to do something or to create something. So, Nikki, all of these project ideas, all of this inspiration for going out and trying animation, maybe even, right, introducing some text to image tools to students if it's the right fit for a group, is fantastic. So, where can people connect with you? Where can they learn more about your work?
I am super active on the socials. So X and IG, I am always sharing what I'm doing inside of the classroom. And I love just connecting with other educators there. So my handles are both at Mrs. Jones 72812 for both of those places. I also love presenting at conferences. So I will be at ISTE. I'm
Mhm.
super excited about that coming up. And yeah.
Perfect. Well, I will make sure to link out to everything so people can find you, they can connect with you, and they can learn more about what you're working on. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me. This was awesome, Monica.
It was lots of fun chatting with Nikki today about a topic we both love, creativity in the classroom. So let's make this EdTech easy with a few key points from today's episode. Animation activities can boost student engagement. AI can help bring animated characters to life. Text to image tools can help students create their own backgrounds. Teachers can use these tools to create videos too. Remember, you can find the full list of resources we talked about in today's episode, including all the ways to connect with Nikki, by heading to classtechtips.com/podcast and finding today's episode. You'll also see the show notes link in the summary or the description area if you're listening to this podcast on an app like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. This episode is sponsored by my free weekly planner pages. I've created a downloadable set of planner pages for you that you can start using today. It's a great way to stay organized in the new year or anytime you like. Print them out to write in your daily schedule and tasks, or use the file on your tablet or computer to keep track of your to-do list and set your priorities each day. These planner pages are totally free, and you can find them at classtechtips.com/planner. Thank you for listening to this new episode of the Easy EdTech podcast. I love creating new episodes for you each week, but I could use a bit of help spreading the word about the podcast. Can you leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast app? Spotify will let you tap on the stars, and Apple Podcasts will let you tap on the stars and leave a 1 or 2 sentence review. Thank you so much for taking this extra step. It helps other educators find episodes like this one when they're searching for EdTech tips.